Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and I don't normally read articles start to finish, right? That's usually not my shebango. But with this article in particular, I want to read it start to finish because A, I think it's important. B, I posted it over on my Facebook not because of the headline, but because I thought that it did a pretty thorough job by reading throughout. And I expected a lot of flack right out of the gates because of the headline. So I said, look, if you're not going to read this article all the way and not just the headline, please don't comment. And so far, there have not been a lot of comments, but there's been, a decent amount of shares. Everything's pretty throttled for me on social media. That's why I don't really spend a lot of time stream. That's why I don't stream to Facebook, right? I don't even bother because I don't want to be thrown off of Facebook. The metrics are already so low, etc. But on my personal page, where I don't really post a lot of my private life, I keep most of my private life private, right? I decided to post this article because it's so damn important. And the statistics, the numbers, they're so in your face. And sometimes it feels like to me that people just want to believe their own narrative. They never want to admit that they've been duped or they were wrong or, they didn't predict something properly, right? That they found information that led them to believe something completely different. That's hard for people. That's hard. And when you start talking about the lockdown and this now mask religion, right, that's out there, the mask religion, the soon to come vaccine religion, the way that, Bill Gates elates in glee talking about COVID 1984 and mandatory vaccinations and all these different things. We're living in a twisted upside down world. So I don't even want to put my opinion out on this one. I'm just going to simply read it start to finish with, my Jason Burmis inflections. And I'm going to let you decide. And I'm going to put the hyperlink to this in there right now for everybody to see so they can share this article too if you think it's important information. If you think it should get out there, because I really believe that this thing is extremely important. So there's the link. And before we read the whole thing, guys, you guys know that what we're about to do is probably some pretty harmful content. Reading a mainstream media article that is based in fact and experience and firsthand knowledge. Just saying. It's kooky. It's kooky. I'm just saying. And props to the Daily Mail for publishing this. Props to the author. We'll get to that in a minute. Fully demonetized. $5, $10, $15. Big donors. Need you now more than ever. Let's bring this up. We only got about, 8, 9 more days left in this deal. And you can also support me over on Rockfin. If I am fully taken off of this platform as we've been demonetized 4+ months. If they boot me off, rockfin.com is where you're going to be able to find me, folks. So go create a free account and check them out there. Here's all the documentary films. You find those over on my channel in the documentaries playlist. Pretty easy to find there, folks. Make sure you're thumbing the videos up, subscribing, sharing, joining the Burmis Brigade, checking out the t-shirts. Remember that your life matters. Your skin color shouldn't have to. I'm a content of character kind of guy. Let's do it. Props to Dominic Sandbrook for this article. Okay. Start to finish. I'm not going to break it down at all. I'm just going to read this thing because I think it's pretty damn important. No lockdown, no masks, no hysteria, no problem. Sweden didn't go into a corona coma, and it's living in glorious normality. Now Dominic Sandbrook asks, is this proof we got it all terribly wrong? Remember, folks, before I read this whole article, not a new normal, just normality. You remember it? March normality. We can do it again, I promise you. Where is my... There we go. All right. A few days ago, I took a stroll to the shops. It was a glorious morning, and the parks and cafes were full of families enjoying the sunshine. Perhaps the shops were a little quieter than they would have been a year ago, but they were busy enough. The restaurants were preparing for lunch, the mood was relaxed and happy, and nobody, yes, nobody, was wearing a mask. That, of course, is the giveaway. I wasn't in Britain, but in Sweden, a nation which stood alone in Europe in refusing to institute lockdown. And as I queued to buy my son a ice cream, I was struck by the contrast with the situation back home. Like most people, I never imagined that the lockdown would last so long, or that the consequences would be so calamitous. And they do a good job of putting the stats in there, guys. Indeed, a few weeks ago, after Boris Johnson announced the draconian restrictions on lives and livelihoods, I wrote on these pages that fears of a second Great Depression were overblown, and that with the right spirit, Britain would quickly bounce back. But as the months went on, and we sank into inertia, my optimism evaporated. Recent figures suggest that our economy shrank by 20% in the first 3 months of lockdown, a far worse decline than in other industrial countries such as the US and Germany. Most experts believe the worst is yet to come, with the Bank of England predicting that unemployment will hit 2.5 million by the end of the year. And even that may be too optimistic. Yes, despite these dire projections and the need to get the nation up and running, and in spite of the good news on the dramatic fall in death rates and admissions to hospitals, parts of Britain remain in the grip of near terminal paralysis. City centers are deserted, commuter trains empty, and the offices that are open operating with skeleton staff. As a result, countless shops, pubs, restaurants, and cafes have not bothered to reopen, and they may never do so. As for Boris Johnson, he appeared to have vanished without a trace, at least until the mail tracked him down to a remote Scottish location this week. The government seems incapable of giving a lead, and the public mood is characterized by bickering, a bitter negativity. There is little sign of the upbeat, we-can-do spirit we badly need to revive our national fortunes. So let's continue. So it was with a sense of relief that 2 weeks ago I boarded the plane to the Swedish capital, Stockholm. For in Sweden, leaders kept shops and offices open throughout, insisted that children went to school, and still do not tell their citizens to wear masks. Yet I can't deny I felt a twinge of anxiety as fervent admirers of all things Scandinavian we'd arranged our family holiday when the coronavirus was merely a glint in the eye of the Chinese bat. Ha 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 ha. Occasionally, I wondered if we might be sensible to cancel, but my wife, as a much braver person than me, would not hear of it. And quite apart from the attraction of cinnamon buns, unspoiled forests, and glittering Baltic waters, I was curious to see how Sweden was getting on. For months, their country had been the great outlier, inspiring admiration and horror in equal measure. Some reports claimed that ordinary life was unchanged. Others, especially in left-wing circles, attacked Sweden as a dystopian disaster zone, as if the streets were littered with unburied bodies. The author of the country's coronavirus strategy, a mild-mannered state epidemiologist called Andres Tegnell, has become one of the most controversial men in Europe. From the start, he insisted the mandatory lockdown was a waste of time. Sweden had a long-established plan for a pandemic, Mr. Tegnell said, and was going to stick to it. People should be sensible, wash their hands, avoid public transport, and keep a safe distance. But that was it. Closing schools was meaningless. Shutting borders was ridiculous. masks were by and large a waste of time. Shops and restaurants should stay open. And when interviewers asked why Sweden was not following Germany, France, and Britain in locking down, Mr. Tegnell had a robust answer. Other countries, he said, had panicked, but panicking was not the Swedish way. Even as the virus spread, death rates soared, and hospitals in Italy and Spain were overwhelmed, Sweden stuck to its guns. No lockdown. The results were not perfect. Like us, the Swedes failed to protect their care homes. By the time I landed in Stockholm, their death rates stood at almost 57 per 100,000 people, far worse than in neighboring Nordic countries. In fairness, though Sweden is in part more densely populated than most of Norway, Denmark, and Finland, with 3 large cities in Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmo. And this is key, guys. This is where I'm going to interrupt for a second. Think about this. This is the other part of the quote that I quoted during this lockdown. This post on Facebook. And Sweden's death rate is still lower than in Belgium, 87 per 100K. Spain, 62. Britain, 62. And Italy, 58. All of which did go into lockdown. Something you never hear in the mainstream. That their death per 100,000 is still lower than all of those European countries. Okay, so let's keep going down this article. This is an important article. Again, if you think this is a good one, I'd post it. So what did I make of it? Well, that's easy. After the negativity, paranoia, moaning, and squabbling of Britain, Sweden was paradise. The contrast struck me almost immediately at the supermarket. Usually the sky-high Scandinavian prices leave me wincing in anguish. But this time, I barely noticed them. Too busy enjoying the lack of queues outside the shop, the absence of masks, and generally relaxed atmosphere. Nobody recoiled in horror when our trolley came within 5 meters of them, nor did people shrink in terror when another shopper appeared in the aisle, as is the norm in British supermarkets these days. That set the tone for the next 2 weeks. For the Swedes, summer life is carried on as normal. Perhaps people give strangers a little more distance than they usually would, but so sensibly, so discreetly, that you barely noticed. When we went kayaking in the gorgeous Stockholm archipelago, the guy told us that he was fully booked at weekends, even though foreign tourist numbers had plummeted. Similarly, when we visited the stunning Baltic island of Gotland, a kind of Scandinavian version of Cornwall, the holiday season was in full swing. The restaurants were busy, and we often needed a booking to get in. Yes, we were offered hand sanitizer on arrival, but there was no great song and dance about it. I hate the hand sanitizer. You know how much I feel about that, guys. Since most Swedes speak excellent English, we often ask people what they made of it all. And the answers we always got were the same. Yes, they were sorry that the virus had gotten to the care homes, but without exception, the Swedes were glad to have escaped lockdown. By this time, with the A-level shambles beginning to unfold back home, I was feeling miserable about the prospect of returning. But perhaps the Swedish experience was too good to be true. I had to look at the latest figures to find out. On August 3rd, the day we arrived in Stockholm, just one Swedish person was reported to have died of COVID-19. The next day's death toll was 3. The following days was 13. Then it was down to 6. According to Sebastian Rushworth, an American-born doctor in Stockholm, the A&E department, he hasn't seen a single COVID-19 patient in a month. Basically, he writes, COVID, in all practical senses, is over and done with in Sweden. So should Britain have followed in the Swedish example? One obvious counterargument is that Britain is even more densely populated, with about 70 million people to Sweden's 10 million. Perhaps we were analyzing always going to need some sort of lockdown, if only temporarily. In every other respect, though, I think the comparison shows us in an almost embarrassing light. In the first 3 months, Sweden's economy shrank by approximately 9%, less than half the downturn in our own economy. Our children stayed at home, theirs went to school. Our businesses closed, theirs stayed open. Our social and cultural life ground to a halt. Theirs continued with some sensible restrictions. At the top, the difference could hardly be more glaring. Sweden scientists drew up a plan, and their governments calmly followed it. Even as international criticism of the tactics mounted, Mr. Tegnell remained calm. Again and again, he repeated there was no point in panicking, no point in making crowd-pleasing gestures, and no point in committing economic suicide. Even as international criticism of the tactics mounted, Contrast that with Britain's politicians, floundering around like drunkards at closing time, flip-flopping on policy and constantly being dragged into an ever more stringent measures to appease the public hysteria. This is a prime article, guys. Prime article. But perhaps it's too easy to blame Boris Johnson and company, who are, after all, merely a reflection of the society they serve. Yes, the predator class, that high society. Mr. Tegnell's approach worked because the Swedes are a serious, sensible, law-abiding lot who believe in individual responsibility and can be trusted to behave themselves. Again, contrast that with the scenes here. First, the panic buying, the toilet rolls, then the punch-ups in supermarket aisles and car parks, the absurd crowds at South Castle beaches, even mobs of anti-racist anarchists who also brought a pandemic was the ideal time to rant and rave. All pretty miserable, I know. And I can't deny that when we flew back to face a fortnight's quarantine, yes, a fortnight's quarantine, I felt distinctly depressed. Not just the thought of those blasted masks, but all the prospects of all the left-wing whining, right-wing bickering, political incompetence, and general irresponsibility ahead. So in Scandinavian spirit, here's a positive note which to end. Tragic as the death toll in Britain has been, it has not come close to the 250,000 predicted by Professor Neil Ferguson's apocalyptic model, which reportedly inspired Boris Johnson's decision to impose lockdown. The death rate has been declining for months, a 95% fall since the peak in April. Coronavirus casualties are now 6 times lower than deaths from the flu and pneumonia. In the week of July 31st, just 2.2% of deaths in England and Wales were caused by COVID. Children don't seem to suffer from the virus or spread it much. Just one healthy child is known to have died from COVID in Britain, and there is not a single case recorded worldwide of a child giving the virus to a teacher. We all know who is at the greatest risk: the very old, the very fat, people with Caribbean and Asian backgrounds, or underlying problems such as diabetes and lung disease. And our clinicians have much better at treating and managing the disease. There's no reason, in other words, why Britain's politicians can't change the record and do so fast, even if it disrupts the precious holidays. For too long, we've been ruled by paranoia, by economic logic. Sheer common sense dictate that we can't remain paralyzed for a minute longer. The priority now must be to restart the engines of enterprise, rebuild the economy. Life always involves an element of risk, and as long as we're sensible, we need to go back to normal and free ourselves from our national funk. Now is the time, all but belatedly, for Boris Johnson to issue a call to arms. He may fancy himself as a reincarnation of Churchill, but so far he has failed to match the great man's courage at a time of national crisis. Now more than ever, he needs to throw his caution and rally the nation. Yeah, but is he a puppet of the predator class? The truth is that many of us, the last few months, have been on one long holiday from reality. But the summer is almost over and the economy is on life support. It's time we get back to work. And I get it. That article's out of the UK. But look at the facts and look at the reflection of what's going on in this country right now in the United States, right? So, props to Dominic Sandbrook for that article. Great article. I encourage you to share it. I'm going to copy it one more time and put it in the live chat so you guys can share that article. But it shows how biased everything is and how countries that did go into lockdown actually did worse than Sweden. So thumbs the video up, subscribe, and share. Remember, we're fully demonetized here. Didn't want to get in trouble. We read an authoritative source on air. God forbid, an opinion piece, right? Just an opinion piece. $5, $10, $15 means the world to me. Big donors, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Rockfin is where you can find me if we do get totally thrown off. But there's also exclusive content over there. Go sign up. Check out the documentary films. Again, ring that bell for notifications. Share the Burmese Brigade everywhere you can for now. Can't do it on Pinterest anymore, I guess. And remember that your life matters. Your skin color shouldn't have to. We judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I love you guys. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you on the flip side.